Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating. I'm going to show you how a 200-year-old quantum physics experiment actually perfectly mirrors your metabolic health. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Physics and metabolism? Really? It sounds like a pretty wild connection. I get it. But stick with me here, because by the end of our time together, you're going to see your body and the profound way you interact with it in a completely different light. And why does this matter so much? Well, because so many of us feel totally stuck, right? We feel like we're fighting against our own biology day in and day out. But what if simply changing how we measure our progress literally changes how our biology behaves? Let's dive in.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll briefly cover the 200-year argument, look at ripples and interference, and then uncover the true observer effect. From there, we'll connect the dots to your metabolism and the lens you use, walk through a relatable example, and finally wrap up with some really clear action steps you can take today.
All right, let's kick things off by looking at a massive historical shift in how humanity actually understood the basic building blocks of reality. So, back in the early 1700s, Sir Isaac Newton proposed that light was made of tiny, rigid particles. He thought they traveled in perfectly straight lines, almost like miniature bullets. And, because Newton had such a towering intellect and an equally towering reputation, this really rigid view went largely unchallenged for an entire century. It was considered absolutely settled science. But it's kind of funny how settled science can sometimes blind us to new possibilities, right? That is until 1801, when an English physician and polymath named Thomas Young came along. Young suspected that light actually didn't act like rigid bullets at all, but behaved much more like waves, specifically like fluid, adaptable ripples on water. To actually prove his theory, Young set up an incredibly elegant, deceptively simple test. Let's take a look.
So, Young's setup is famous now. He shone a continuous beam of light through a barrier that had two very narrow slits cut close together, and he placed a screen behind it to catch whatever came through. Now, if Newton's tiny bullets theory was right, you'd expect to see just two clean, bright bands on the screen directly behind those slits, right? Just two impact zones. But that is not what Young saw. Instead, he saw an interference pattern, basically many alternating bright and dark stripes fanning all the way across the screen. The absolute easiest way to picture this is to just imagine a perfectly calm pond. If you drop two stones into that water right next to each other, they each send out circular ripples. And where two ripple crests arrive together, they amplify into a much bigger wave. But where a crest meets a trough, they cancel each other out completely, leaving perfectly still water.
So why is this a big deal? Well, because it completely dismantled that rigid particle theory. Particles, like tiny bullets, simply cannot cancel each other out in midair. Only overlapping waves can do this. By capturing this interference pattern on a screen, Young brilliantly proved that light actually behaves like a wave. And this phenomenon became a cornerstone of what we now call wave-particle duality. But here is where it gets incredibly weird. The ultimate cliffhanger came in the 20th century, when physicists decided to rerun this double-slit experiment. But this time, they fired single particles, like individual photons, one at a single time. Not a continuous beam, just lonely, isolated particles. And sure enough, each particle hit the screen as a single, tiny point of impact, exactly like a tiny bullet should. But wait for it, here is the impossible twist. As thousands of these single points accumulated over time on the back screen, they naturally assembled into the exact same striped interference pattern. Even though they were traveling completely alone, one by one, each individual particle somehow knew about both slits and behaved as if it were a fluid wave. This impossible twist obviously led physicists to scratch their heads and ask, wait, which slit is this single particle actually going through? Naturally, scientists wanted to track the exact path. They had to know. So they placed a detector right at the slits to measure which one the particle passed through. But the very moment they placed an instrument there to take a physical measurement, the interference pattern completely collapsed. It literally vanished instantly, replaced by the simple, rigid two-band pattern you'd expect from ordinary bullet-like particles. Stop measuring the path, and that fluid wave pattern returns. Start measuring it again, and it collapses back into rigid particles. The experimental fact is stunningly clear here. Physically measuring the particle's path actually alters the outcome. This is known as the observer effect. Now, I really want to pause right here, because I want to be scientifically honest and extremely firm about this next point. In physics, the word observing means a physical interaction with an instrument that extracts information. Even a fully automated sensor, with literally no human being in the building, produces this exact same collapse. The popular mystical extrapolation out there that human consciousness somehow controls subatomic reality, well, it's just that, a popular extrapolation, not settled physics. We aren't making magical claims here. But what we are doing is taking this profound, verified experimental fact that the physical act of measurement changes the outcome, and we're using it as a beautiful, really powerful metaphor for how we view our own biology.
And that brings us to exactly how this applies to you. Let's look at metabolism and the lens you're using.
So the metaphor is simply this. The lens through which you measure or observe your body actually shapes the biological pattern that shows up. Think about it. When you observe your body through a lens of constant threat, say chronic stress, really harsh self-criticism, or deeply believing you're somehow broken, your physiology defensively collapses into a narrow survival state. And this isn't just a fun metaphor. This is thoroughly documented stress physiology. Your cortisol rises, your blood sugar spikes, and insulin literally locks your fat cells shut. Your body collapses into a rigid, defensive two-band pattern. But when you observe your body through what we call the safe zone lens, you give your body the environment to express its full natural fluid range. You start seeing adaptable energy, way better sleep, and highly flexible fat metabolism. The real secret here is shifting out of that rigid defensive state. Using the foundational UMA method and tools like the metabolic triangle method, where we systematically activate, sustain, and protect your energy, we can literally shift your body out of that rigid two-band stress pattern and back into a fluid, expansive wave of vibrant health. Listen to me on this. You are not broken. You might just be using the completely wrong instrument to measure your progress. So, let's ground this physics metaphor in the daily reality of your own journey. This is a scenario I see constantly when I'm coaching. So many folks arrive feeling just totally exhausted and overwhelmed. They look at their past struggles and conclude, I have no willpower. I'm just always going to be this way. But I want you to think about the observer effect for a second. By continually measuring their body through a lens of expected failure and stress, they actually trigger the exact physiological threat response, spiking those stress hormones and locking up their metabolism that ultimately confirms exactly what they expected to happen. The observation itself is creating the limitation. So, how do we fix this? The solution definitely isn't to get into a mental boxing match with your deeply held beliefs. That's just more stress. Instead, we use a really warm, inviting tool called identity architecture. This is all about actively changing your lens of measurement by practicing a brand new daily observation. It's about gently altering what your nervous system notices first. We are stepping out of the threat lens and calmly walking into the safe zone. Now, let's be real. By changing the lens, you aren't going to completely change your biology overnight. The scale might not drop 3 pounds by tomorrow morning. And hey, that's okay. Because what does happen is you immediately begin to experience what we call non-scale victories. Since you've stopped collapsing your system with that harsh threat lens, your nervous system begins to heal long before your fat cells ever release. You'll start noticing much deeper sleep. You'll have steadier energy in the afternoon without that horrible crash. You'll see smoother digestion and just the calmer, more grounded mood. These fluid waves of health show up way before the rigid number on the scale ever moves. All right, let's take all this fascinating science and turn it into 3 practical actions you can start doing right now. Here are your 3 steps to get started today. Step 1. For just one single day, simply notice your lens without any judgment. Are you measuring your body through a lens of threat or a lens of calm command? Just gently observe the observer. Step 2. Tomorrow morning, before you check a mirror or even think about stepping on a scale, use identity architecture. Say a statement out loud, like, I am someone who protects my recovery. Change the physical measurement you're actively projecting onto your day. And step 3, tonight, before bed, run the 10-3-2-1-0 protocol. This is a highly effective physical way to signal that safe zone to your nervous system, allowing your amazing body to drop its defensive pattern and actually rebuild while you sleep. And please remember, you really do not have to do this alone. If you want to practice shifting your lens away from threat and towards safety, alongside a warm, welcoming community of people doing the exact same thing, I highly encourage you to come join the Metabolic Energy Mastermind. It is just a fantastic place to turn these abstract concepts into your daily lived reality. Look, you possess an amazing, highly adaptable body. And by simply changing the lens through which you observe and interact with it, you can unlock a completely different biological reality. If a single shift in physical measurement can completely rewrite the behavior of a subatomic particle, Just imagine what shifting your lens could do for the rest of your life. Stay the course. Mission on.